Hi guys, this is Tiffany from the blog growingdawn.com, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about sourdough. If you follow me over on Instagram, you know that I am all about the sourdough things, and you may be wondering why or what is sourdough. Maybe this is a totally new concept to you. So I wanted to take some time today to talk about what sourdough starter is, how you can start your own, the benefits of it, what you can do with it, and all of that. So let's get into it. Specifically, I wanted to share with you a sourdough brownie recipe. So at the end of this video, I will be quickly sharing that. It is super easy, a great way to ease yourself into using sourdough starter if you are new. So there was a point in my life, probably about 8 years ago, that I was a mom of just one kid, and I was totally into making my own bread, making homemade muffins, bars, treats, so that our family could avoid processed ingredients. And I still am very much like that today. The thing is, I have a little less time now with 4 kids under the age of 8 to feed and take care of. But back then, about 8 years ago, that was my first ever experience with sourdough starter. And I was very consistent with it for a while. And I'm not really sure what happened, but eventually it died, and I didn't pick it back up again until somewhat recently, like the last year. The difference between then and now is I had no idea just how much you could do with sourdough starter. You know, then it was all about just making bread. I honestly don't remember if I ever did anything else with it other than make bread. But now I know that there is an endless amount of baked goods that you can do with sourdough starter that are still fully fermented, just as gut healthy, just as delicious and valuable as baking the bread. So like I said, back then I had a little more time. Well, now things are a little bit busier, so I find myself implementing more of these quick and easy sourdough recipes as opposed to just making bread all the time. Now don't get me wrong, I love making loaves of sourdough bread, but it's one of those things that takes a little too much time and planning ahead for me to do constantly. And if you've used sourdough before, you know that sometimes you can end up with a ton of starter that you have no idea what to do with. Now, some people recommend just discarding starter, and that's something that you do have to do when you're first getting it started and getting it active and mature. But once your starter is mature, there's really no reason to discard anymore. So I am very much a non-waste kind of girl. So the thought of just throwing out perfectly good food, even if it is just flour and water, is insane to me. Because of that, I have found lots of ways to make use of all of my extra starter. And one of those is the brownie recipe that I will be sharing later today. So now you may be wondering, what is sourdough starter really, and how do I get my hands on some? Like I just said a little bit ago, sourdough starter is nothing but flour and water. Yes, it really is that simple. That flour and water that we mix together turns into a fermented, bubbly, gut-healthy superfood. And that is thanks to the wild beneficial yeasts and bacteria that grow during the fermentation process. The very quick version on explaining fermentation is this. Number 1, water is added to a food and placed in anaerobic conditions. Number 2, beneficial microorganisms are left to sit out on the counter with no refrigeration. This gives those organisms life. And number 3, these microbes break down the sugars and starches into beneficial alcohols and acids. Now, on its own, the typical wheat flour, even the organic whole wheat versions, the kind of flour that you buy at the store, are typically lacking in nutrients. The important thing to know here is those beneficial alcohols and acids that I was just explaining is what gives sourdough starter a much greater nutritional content. By eating fermented foods, we keep our gut and our intestinal tract healthy. There has been a lot of research that shows correlation between the gut and overall health. Eating bread for my health, don't mind if I do. So if you can't find starter from a friend, which if you know me, come find me. I will share my starter with you. It would give me great joy. The great thing about sourdough starter is once it gets going, it's easy to keep it multiplying, it's easy to give it away. So you may already know someone that has a starter. Ask around. If not, it's really easy to get your own going. The basic process of making sourdough starter is, number one, mix 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of filtered water and stir thoroughly. I do recommend using filtered water for the beginning stages of getting your starter going. However, once it is established, it's really not necessary to use filtered water. I use water straight from my tap. Number 2, place a clean tea towel over the bowl and let it set for 24 hours. Number 3, the next day, go ahead and discard half of the mixture. And then step 4, you repeat the process by adding another cup of flour and another cup of water to your starter. You're just going to repeat those 4 steps for about 5 to 7 days. And at this point, you can discard and feed your starter once every 12 hours for 2 to 3 days. So the first 5 days, discard and go through the feeding process for your starter once every 24 hours. After about 5 days, switch it up and do it every 12 hours for 2 or 3 days. And at this point, if at least a week has gone by and you have consistently followed those steps, you should have a active bubbly starter going. One way that you can test this is about 12 hours after a feeding and your starter is kind of bubbly, you can take a small amount out, put it in a glass of water. If it floats, you know that it's active. That's a good sign that your starter is good to go, mature, ready to use for whatever you need to use it for. And that's it. Simple, right? Now that you know how starter is made, let's get into the brownie recipe. I'm going to show you guys exactly how I make these sourdough skillet brownies. Now, I like to use a cast iron pan, and that is because the benefit of using cast iron is you can melt your butter and your chocolate chips right on the stove, mix everything in your cast iron pan, and then bake it in your cast iron pan. This can literally be a 1 pan, 1 dish dessert. You don't have to dirty anything else. So yeah, for some people this may be seen as lazy, but to be honest, I really don't care because, like I said, I'm a mom of 4 and I'm all about easy, simple, healthy, delicious recipes. So I am starting this off by turning my burner to low to medium low. Right now I have it set on 3, and I'm going to take 2 sticks of butter. I use salted butter just because that's what we always have on hand. That's what we use, so I usually don't have unsalted butter. But if you do use unsalted butter, you will just want to add a little bit more salt. I'm going to melt them in my cast iron skillet. Now I am using a 14-inch cast iron skillet. That's pretty large, but we have a fairly large family. So for you, if you wanted to cut this recipe in half and maybe do it in a 10-inch skillet, you could definitely do that. Okay, so continuing on with the recipe, you need 1 cup of chocolate chips. I like to use organic bittersweet chocolate chips just as a cleaner option, but any chocolate chips will work. You want to add those in with your melted butter and melt it over low heat until it's nice and smooth. And at this point, you will want to go ahead and turn your burner off. That way the mixture doesn't get too hot, because here in a minute we're going to be adding eggs, and you definitely don't want those to cook. So for this recipe, I am using 3 eggs. Basically, each ingredient addition, I like to mix the batter just so everything gets thoroughly incorporated. Next, I'm adding ½ a cup of organic cane sugar and ½ a cup of coconut sugar. The sugars can be substituted for any granulated sweetener that subs for sugar in a 1-to-1 ratio. Next, I'm adding a teaspoon of vanilla and ½ a teaspoon of salt. And And our most important ingredient, of course, sourdough starter. I am adding half a cup of starter. I kind of mix that in, and then I add half a cup of cocoa powder. I like to use raw organic cacao powder. I will leave a link below in the description if you're interested in looking at that. I like to use raw because the nutrient content is so much higher. And finally, I am adding half a teaspoon of baking soda. It is pretty important that you add baking soda at the end, just because of the way that it reacts to the starter. Once all my ingredients are mixed and incorporated, I like to scrape the sides down. Bake in a preheated 350-degree oven for 20 minutes, and your brownies should come out perfect. I like to let the brownies cool completely so that they don't fall apart when you're cutting them. That's it for this video, guys. Let me know what you think in a comment below. Be sure to hit subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video.